Hey there, my friend. Come a little closer to the fire with me. Tonight, I want to tell you a darker truth about shelter. Not the cheerful kind from postcards, but the kind that is tested under a sky that suddenly turns the color of bruised iron. Out on the Great Plains, a clear afternoon could fold into a storm so fast it felt like the world forgot how to breathe. Rain could arrive sideways, needles of cold water, driven by wind that had nothing to stop it for 1,000 miles. Thunder could roll so long you started counting, and the numbers kept shrinking, as if and in that open place, where there is nowhere to hide, people learn to sleep anyway. If you enjoy drifting into these quiet, shadowed journeys, please like and subscribe. It helps this little candlelit room stay warm, and it tells me you want another story tomorrow night. Now, let the room dim in your mind. Let your shoulders loosen. Let your jaws soften, just enough that your teeth are not holding each other too tightly. Breathe in slowly, as if you could taste the smoke from the hearth, and breathe out as if you are letting old dust fall from your ribs. There is no hurry. The storm can take its time out there. In here, beside this fireplace, we can move at the pace of embers. If you were standing here with me, you would hear the smallest sounds first. The faint tick of cooling wood, the hush of the house settling, candlelight making slow, amber pools on the floor, like shallow water that never spills. Sometimes I think candlelight is a kind of gentle spell. It makes sharp corners round, and it makes the night feel as though it has soft hands. And with that softness around us, we can step back in time. Picture the Great Plains of North America stretching outward in every direction until distance becomes a kind of silence. Flat grasslands, the color of dried wheat and old bone, rising and falling only with the wind. The sky is not just above you there, it is everywhere. It forms a dome that seems to press down on the horizon, and if you look long enough, your eyes start to water, not from sadness, but from the immensity. There are few trees, no forests to lean into, no caves to swallow you, no hills high enough to hide behind when the weather decides to change its mood. The wind moves without obstacle, like a thought that cannot be interrupted. It sweeps across open earth, lifting dust, carrying the scent of faraway rain, long before the first cloud reaches you. That smell is strange. Honestly, I have always found it strange that you can smell a storm coming, the sharp edge of ozone, the clean, metallic bite mixed with daw. This was home for many native nations: the Lakota, the Cheyenne, the Blackfoot, the Crow, the Kiowa, and others who learned the language of the land through their bones and breath. They followed bison herds with the seasons, moving as the grass changed, moving as the animals moved, moving because stillness in that place could mean hunger. Their lives were not drifting without purpose. It was a pattern, a living map drawn again and again, a cycle older than any one person, older than any single campfire. If you imagine a family standing out there, alone on the plains, you can feel the exposed truth of it. Wind finds every surface. It slides beneath clothing and steals warmth. Rain does not politely fall straight down. It swirls, shifts, strikes from strange angles, and the cold seeps in as soon as fabric darkens. There is also the weight of being small under that sky, that psychological heaviness, the way your thoughts can become loud when you have nowhere to hide. So the problem was not a small one. It was not decorative. It was survival. How do you stay dry and safe when the world offers you no shelter? The answer did not arrive in a single bright moment, like a hero stepping into a myth. It arrived the way most real answers arrive, quietly, over generations, tested and corrected and remembered. What worked was kept. What failed was left behind like a broken tool. Over time, a form emerged so practical, so refined, that it spread across the plains with remarkable consistency. The tipi, sometimes spelled tepi, a dwelling made from long poles arranged into a cone, wrapped in a cover of bison hide, anch. The word tepi comes from the Lakota language, from words meaning they dwell. I like that. Not they camp, not they pass through, they dwell. Even in a moving life, there is dwelling. There is a place where you can breathe without flinching. Now, let us step closer to a camp in fair weather, before the sky darkens. Tipis stand in a circle, each one similar in shape, yet each one carrying its own personality, its own decoration, its own quiet history. The circle opens to the east, toward the rising sun, like a slow, daily promise. Each family has a place. The arrangement is not random. It is social organization made visible. Relationships drawn on the ground. Related families camp near each other. Leaders and important households may occupy certain positions. The spacing matters too. 15 or 20 feet between tea. In the calm hours, life happens mostly outside. Women work on hides, hands busy with scraping and tanning and sewing, the same movements repeated until they become as natural as breathing. Men maintain tools and weapons, or sit in council, speaking of hunts, of movement, of the way the wind has been behaving lately. Children run between lodges, playing games that mimic adult life, tiny rehearsals for the responsibilities waiting in their future. Dogs wander, collecting scraps, clever and patient. Horses graze beyond the circle, watched by young herder. Cooking fires burn outside in good weather, smoke lifting into the open air. Meat dries on racks. Herbs and plants collected in summer are sorted and stored. Inside the tipis, sleeping robes are folded neatly. Storage containers rest along the walls. Everything has a place, because order in a small space is a kind of peace. Sometimes the lower edge of a teepee cover is rolled up or propped open with sticks. This lets a cooling breeze flow through. It casts shade. It makes the interior visible from outside. A small room under a cone of hide, warm with the color of leather and the glow of daylight. Above, thin columns of smoke rise from the smoke holes at the top, marking each dwelling like a quiet signature against the sky. This is the rhythm that storms would disrupt, but never destroy. Now, listen. The wind changes. On the Great Plains, storms can build with frightening speed. One moment, the sky is a clean blue that makes you feel almost careless. The next, a darkening appears on the western horizon, like ink soaking into paper. The blue shifts toward gray, then toward a greenish black that some people learn to fear, not because it is supernatural, but because it is a reliable sign of severe weather. The clouds rise vertically, towering higher than your imagination wants to measure. They spread into an anvil shape at the top, flattening where they hit the upper atmosphere, as if the sky itself has a ceiling. The temperature drops quickly, 10 or 15 degrees in minutes. The wind becomes erratic, gusting from one direction, then another, like an animal circling before it strikes, and the smell changes. Ozone and damp dust, wet clay, the breath of the river far away, carried on the wind even if you cannot see the water. Birds grow quiet. Animals sense what is coming. Horses bunch together, turning their backs to the wind. Dogs move closer to the lodges. The light goes flat. Shadows disappear. Colors mute. The world loses depth, and you feel as if you are standing inside a photograph that someone has drained of warmth. People notice. They have seen it 1,000 times. They do not panic. They prepare. If you were there, you would watch the women who own and maintain the tipis move through their tasks with practiced calm. They check the stakes, those wooden pegs driven into the earth around the perimeter. A hand presses each one. A loose stake is driven deeper, the wood tapping into soil with a sound both small and decisive. Sometimes an extra stake is added where the wind likes to tug. Each motion is simple, yet in that simplicity there is a kind of power. The power of knowledge passed down accurately. Small things that could blow away are gathered. Tools, food that has been drying, partially finished work. The way hands move is quick, but not frantic. Children are called inside. They come without argument, because even the youngest understand the routine. A storm is serious business, not a drama. A fact. The smoke flaps at the top require attention. Two large triangular panels near the apex, each with a long pole attached, allow ventilation to be adjusted. The woman of the household steps outside and reads the wind. Which direction is it coming from? How hard does it feel against the skin? How is the rain beginning to angle through the air? If the storm approaches from the west, the western flap is closed or partly closed. The eastern flap remains more open, sheltered from the direct assault. This creates a protected channel for smoke to escape, even as rain tries to force its way in. It is an elegant, flexible system, and it depends on one thing that cannot be bought or rushed: experience. Now, the first drops arrive. They do not fall politely. They strike. Large, cold drops hit the taut hide with a sound like a hand drum, deep and resonant, organic. At first it is irregular. A few thuds, a pause, then more. Then a steady rhythm begins, and the whole teepee seems to listen. Dry bison hide is golden brown. Wet hide darkens, richening into deeper shades as moisture spreads. You can watch the change move across the surface like a slow shadow. And while you can see the color shift, something subtler is happening underneath. Fibers absorb water. They swell. Collagen strands drink in moisture at a microscopic level. And as they swell, they pull tighter against each other, making the hide contract overall. It sounds paradoxical, like one of those quiet riddles the night likes to tell. The seams respond too. The cover is sewn with sinew thread, strong fibers taken from tendon, prepared and split and used like living cord. When sinew becomes wet, it swells, filling the needle holes made during sewing, plugging them, sealing them. The very thing that threatens, rain, triggers the mechanism that protects. The teepee does not fight the storm by brute force. It responds. It adapts. It quietly changes its body. And the weight becomes a strange ally. As the hides absorb water, they become heavier. A cover made from many hides can gain a great deal of weight, enough that you might think it would strain the poles and make the structure fail. But the conical geometry turns weight into stability. Downward pressure forces the poles more tightly together at the top where they meet. The angled poles translate that downward force into inward compression, locking the junction while also pushing outward at the bottom, wedging each pole into the earth. The he. There are limits, of course. The plains can be merciless, but under normal storm conditions, even severe ones, the teepee stands precisely because it turns the storm's energy into reinforcement. Inside, the family waits. The fire at the center burns steadily, not a roaring bonfire, but a controlled warmth. The light flickers against leather walls. Shadows move slowly, like gentle spirits that mean no harm. Above, smoke rises toward the opening, guided by the flaps. Wind, passing over those flaps, creates subtle changes in pressure that help draw smoke out, like a slow breath leaving the lungs. It is not magic, though it can feel like it. It is simply the sky and the shelter working together. Some water may find its way in, a trickle running down a pole, a small dampness at the edge. The design accepts this. It guides water where it will not hurt, toward the periphery, toward the earth that can drink it. The center stays dry. The sleeping robes remain warm. The fire remains alive. Listen to the soundscape now, because this is where the night begins to soften. Rain drums on hide, deep and layered. Wind hums around the cone, sometimes rising in pitch with a gust, sometimes falling into a low moan. Thunder arrives as a rolling presence, softened by the walls, felt as vibration in your chest more than a sharp crack. Inside, there are smaller sounds, the crackle of wood, the settling of coals, a quiet murmur of voices, the rustle of hide clothing, breath, slow breath, a child sighing, then another. If you lie down on thick furs, with your head toward the wall and your feet toward the fire, you find a middle zone of warmth. The air is clear where you breathe. The world outside is loud, but it cannot reach you fully. The teepee filters it, transforms it, turns it into a lullaby. And as the storm settles into its rhythm, we can drift a little deeper into the home itself, into the hidden layers that keep dryness and warmth close to the skin, even when water is moving nearby, unseen, in quiet channels, like a secret river behind a wall. The fire beside me has lowered a little, and the candle flame is steadier now, as if it has found a comfortable size for the night. I want you to imagine that same steadiness inside the teepee, because the story becomes even more intimate when we step past the outer cover and into the inner skin of the home. You know that feeling when you walk into a museum and the noise of the street vanishes behind the doors? That hush, that softened air, that sense that time is thicker in here. A teepee during a storm can feel like that, a museum hush made from hide and breath, while outside the plains are loud with weather and distance. We have already watched the cover tighten and the seams swell shut. Now let us move closer to the inside, where the darkness is warm and the details are small enough to hold in one hand. There is a feature many outsiders overlooked, something easy to dismiss if you are only visiting for an afternoon. It hangs quietly from the poles, and it changes everything. The liner. In some traditions it is called the ozon. Picture a second wall, made of hide or later canvas, suspended inside the tipi at a height of about 6 to 8 feet, not all the way to the peak. It does not touch the smoke hole. It forms an inner room within the larger cone, like a calm chamber inside a storm shell. The liner drops down toward the floor, following the angle of the walls, separated from the outer cover by a narrow gap, 6 inches, a foot, just enough space for air to live in. The liner is not merely decoration. It is not a luxury. It is a piece of quiet engineering, refined through long use, through nights like this, through mornings when people woke dry and grateful, and did not need to speak much about why. Let your mind follow the liner downward until it reaches the ground. It does not stop in midair. It extends to the floor and is tucked under the layers where people sit and sleep. That tucking is careful work. The edge is laid flat. Willow mats go over it. Robes and furs go on top. The weight of those layers pins the liner in place, sealing it at the bottom. A seal made not from glue or nails, but from gravity and habit. Now, once you can see that, you can understand the space between the two walls. It is dark in there, a slim corridor of air that does not receive much light, except perhaps a faint amber glow seeping through the liner. If you put your hand into that gap, you would feel a different temperature. Not as cold as the outer cover, not as warm as the living space. Something in between, like the air in a cave mouth, where outside and inside negotiate. That trapped air is one of the teepee's gentlest secrets. Air is a poor conductor of heat when it is still. When it moves, it steals warmth. When it stays trapped, it protects. So the gap between outer cover and liner becomes an insulating pocket, a continuous envelope around the living space. Heat from the fire and from bodies radiates outward, reaches the liner, and warms the air in the gap. Much of that warmth lingers because the air has nowhere to rush away to. It cannot easily form big convection loops. If the gap is just the right width, it becomes a buffer. Modern people sometimes talk about double-pane windows or sleeping bags that trap air in soft layers. The principle is the same, though the people who lived here did not need modern words to know it. They simply knew what worked. They knew that with a liner, the interior stayed warmer with a smaller fire, and wood on the plains was precious. They knew that a teepee with a liner felt less drafty, more like a room, more like a place that wanted you to rest. And there is another secret the liner holds, one that is almost eerie in its quietness. Water. During a storm, even the best outer cover is not perfectly waterproof forever. Leather resists water well, especially when smoked and cared for, but sustained rain can find weak points, old seams, thin spots, places where years of folding and unfolding have softened the structure. Condensation can be a bigger trouble than direct leaks, especially in cold weather. Warm, humid air from breathing and cooking rises. It touches the cold inner surface of the outer cover, and moisture condenses into droplets. Without a liner, those droplets would gather and drip into the living space. They would fall onto robes, onto hair, onto sleeping faces. They would turn comfort into misery, and misery in cold weather can become something darker, something that stays in the body long after the storm passes. But with the liner, the story changes. Imagine water forming on the inside of the outer cover. It does not usually fall in neat drops. It spreads into thin films, rivulets that cling to the surface of the hide and flow downward along the cone. The slope guides it. Gravity is patient. The water travels until it reaches the height where the liner is attached. And there, instead of continuing into the living space, the water meets the liner like a quiet wall in the dark. It transfers to the outer surface of that liner and keeps moving downward, not into the room where people breathe, but into the hidden gap. It becomes a secret river behind a curtain. You would not hear it. Not really. The rain on the outer cover is louder, a constant drum. The small flow in the gap is muffled. It slides, it seeps. It does its work without demanding attention. I find that strangely comforting. The idea that a home can have hidden pathways for trouble, guiding it away, letting it pass without disturbing sleep. It is like a mind that knows how to let anxious thoughts drift past without grabbing them. As the water moves down the outer surface of the liner, it approaches the bottom where the liner is tucked under floor coverings. The liner at the edge can become damp. The willow mats above it are porous, woven from rods harvested along rivers and streams, dried, rolled for travel, unrolled again. Water can wick into them slowly, then it can seep through. Then the earth below can absorb it, so the water does not pool. It does not suddenly spill. It moves gradually, continuously, into the soil. Prairie soils can drink a surprising amount. They are rich with roots and structure. They hold pockets of air and space, and when water arrives drop by drop, they accept it. Above that slow drainage, the sleeping surface remains dry. Thick bison robes, fur side up, resist water far better than mats. The person lying there feels softness and warmth, and might never know that a few inches below, moisture is traveling down into the ground, the way time travels down into deep history. Now let us step even lower into the floor itself, because sleep is not only about walls and roofs, it is about what holds you up. Before a teepee is raised, the ground inside is examined, rocks removed, sticks cleared. Sometimes the earth is loosened if it is too hard, so it can absorb any stray moisture. If the ground slopes, it is leveled as much as possible. These are simple actions, but they matter. They are the kind of care that turns a temporary place into a home, even if the home will be taken down tomorrow. Then the first layer comes. Mats. Willow mats are common, woven in panels that can be rolled and carried, set down again in a new camp, like pages in a book. They overlap slightly to close gaps. They lift the living surface off the soil. They trap air between rods, making an insulating layer. They also create a clean boundary, a sense that inside this circle, life is arranged. On top of the mats come robes, heavy and warm. A bison robe is not like a thin blanket. It has weight. It settles. The fur traps air in countless tiny pockets. The leather side is soft and flexible. In cold weather, multiple robes are layered in sleeping areas. especially near the walls where the air is cooler. In the center, near the fire, the mats are often left bare for safety, because sparks can jump. The space is zoned without needing words. Fire zone, sitting zone, sleeping zone. The arrangement is, along the perimeter, storage containers are stacked. Parfleches made of rawhide, folded and laced, holding dried meat, tools, clothing, the small objects that make life possible. The stacks add insulation too, another layer of still air trapped behind possessions. Order becomes warmth. Order becomes safety. I want you to feel the night now, deepening. Outside, the storm continues. Inside, the fire is tended with a kind of quiet respect. Wood is scarce on the plains, so the fire is not wasteful. It is built to the size needed, no larger. Tinder prepared and kept dry, kindling arranged with air gaps, larger pieces added slowly. Someone watches the coals, stirs ash away so heat can breathe. Stones around the fire pit absorb warmth and release it slowly, like memory. As evening arrives, the fire is banked. Coals are gathered together. Ash is raked over them, a gray blanket. A couple of thicker pieces of wood might be set to burn slowly. The flames quiet down, and what remains is a steady glow, enough to warm skin, enough to light the liner walls in soft amber. This is the moment when the storm outside can feel almost distant, even though it is still there. Rain on hide becomes a low drumbeat. Wind becomes a muted hum. Thunder rolls, softened, stretching out like a long exhale. Inside, small sounds continue. A robe being pulled closer, fur whispering against fur, a child shifting, then settling. The quiet click of a tool being placed down. A voice speaking softly, perhaps telling a calm story, not to excite, but to soothe, to keep the mind from wandering too far into the dark. People arrange themselves for sleep with heads toward the walls and feet toward the fire. It is a simple geometry that makes sense in the body. Feet close to warmth, head near the cooler edge, a balance. Each person has a place. The circle holds them. The liner holds the air. The air holds the heat. The earth holds the water. The whole system is layered like a gentle spell made from patience. If you listen closely, you can hear breathing join the rain. One breath, then another, slowing, deepening, becoming part of the soundscape, like another natural rhythm. You might even feel your own breath match it. In, out, slow, soft. Stay with me a little longer, because there is one more quiet trick happening between those two walls. At the bottom edge of the outer cover, the hide does not always lie perfectly flush against the earth. There can be a small gap, only a few inches, like the tiniest doorway for air. During a storm, cold air slips in through that opening, but it does not sweep across the sleeping robes the way a draft might in a thin tent. Instead, it enters the dark corridor between outer cover and liner, and then it begins its slow climb. The liner, warmed on its inner face by firelight and bodies, radiates gentle heat. The cold air in the gap absorbs that warmth, little by little, and as it warms, it becomes lighter and rises. Up it goes, sliding along the hidden channel, moving the way a river breath moves upstream, quiet and steady, guided by shape rather than force. By the time that air reaches the top edge of the liner, it has been tempered. It spills over into the upper space of the tipi above the liner, where smoke and heat gather, and then it joins the upward draft toward the smoke hole. Fresh air arrives without a chill, arriving from above rather than cutting in at the ankles. I have always admired that kind of kindness in a design, and the smoke flaps are not only a shield, they shape wind. When wind flows over those angled flaps, it can create a low-pressure pocket above the opening, like a gentle pull. That pull helps draw smoke out, especially when the opening must be narrowed to keep rain from falling in. The storm, oddly enough, can improve the draft. The stronger the wind, the more eagerly it can help the home exhale. Sometimes a little rain still finds a pole near the opening, running down wood in a thin line. It is not a failure. It is simply water choosing the easiest path. The pole guides it to the edge where the liner meets the floor coverings, and from there it slips into the soil, drop by drop, as if the earth is quietly swallowing the problem for you. When you know that, you can stop listening for drips with anxious ears. You can let the sound be only rain, only wind, only a long, steady night. And as you drift, remember this. The Tipi does not promise that storms will not come. It promises something quieter and more honest, that when the sky turns green-black and the wind forgets its manners, there is still a place shaped by knowledge, held by community, reinforced by rain itself, a place where dread can melt into stillness, and where sleep can arrive, steady as coals under ash, carrying you onward into the next part of the night. There is a moment in every storm when the first rush passes, when the camp has already tightened its routines, the children are already inside, and the sky seems to decide, yes, this is what we are doing now. Hours of water, hours of wind, thunder rolling across the plains like a great drum carried from horizon to horizon. In that moment, the teepee becomes less like a structure and more like a living thing. I know that sounds poetic, but if you sit quietly and watch how it behaves, how it changes with moisture and air, it is hard not to feel that it is responding, listening, adjusting. A home that has learned the weather's habits. Let us stay near the smoke hole for a while, because that is where many storms try their hardest to enter. Imagine looking up from the floor, from the ring of robes, and the warm center where coals glow. The cone rises into dimness. Shadows climb the poles. Above the liner, the air is hazier, the place where smoke wanders before it finds its exit. You can see the opening at the peak. Not a simple hole, but a shape defined by two triangular flaps, like folded wings resting in the dark. Each flap has a long pole set into a pocket along its edge, and those poles reach down toward the ground outside. If the storm is strong, the poles can tremble slightly with gusts, but they do not rattle wildly. They are heavy enough to stay steady, and the person adjusting them has a practiced touch. This is the part that always makes me pause. Honestly, the solution is so simple that it almost feels inevitable once you see it. But someone had to notice it first. Someone had to try. Someone had to remember. You cannot let smoke build up inside. The fire needs air. People need air. Yet if you leave a wide opening at the peak during heavy rain, the sky will pour itself into your home. So the flaps become negotiators between two needs. When wind drives rain from one direction, the windward flap is closed, brought inward so the storm hits leather rather than open space. The leeward flap can remain more open, and the two can overlap slightly, leaving a narrow channel where smoke can slip out. Not a dramatic gap, just enough. A slit of night sky. Finding that balance takes judgment. Close them too much, and smoke backs down into the living space, making eyes sting, making breath feel thick. Leave them too open, and water begins to fall where it should not, toward the fire. So the person watching the flaps listens, not only with ears, but with skin. They feel the wind direction on their face. They notice how the rain strikes. They step back inside and watch the smoke, and then something even quieter happens. Wind moving over the flaps changes air pressure. Faster air above the opening creates a small pocket of lower pressure right over the smoke hole. That low pressure becomes a gentle pull, like an invisible hand drawing air upward. Smoke rising from the fire is already eager to rise, carried by heat. The low pressure helps it rise more cleanly, even if the opening is narrow. The storm, by pushing wind over the flaps, helps the teepee breathe. I find something calming in that idea, that the very force that could threaten you becomes part of your ventilation, like learning to use your own anxious energy to guide yourself toward calm rather than fighting it. The wind becomes an ally, not a monster. Of course, no system is perfect. Even with careful flap positioning, some water can enter. Rain can find little gaps where poles pass through. Water can run down the outer surface of a pole and then continue down the inner surface, as if the wood is a narrow path offered to it. Yet even that is anticipated. Water traveling down a pole does not fall into the center. It slides along the wood until it reaches the earth at the edge of the tipi, where the pole rests. It lands away from sleeping places, away from the fire, and it is absorbed by soil, a trickle, not a flood. Now, let us return to the liner, because this is where the tipi becomes almost eerie in its quiet competence. Think of all the moisture in a stormy night, not only the rain striking the cover, not only the small seepage through tired seams, but also the humidity inside, breath, cooking steam, damp clothing, the warmth of bodies. Warm air holds more moisture than cold air. When that warm, moist air touches a cold surface, it releases some of its water as condensation. It is the same thing that makes droplets form on a window in winter. If the tipi had only one wall, the inner surface of the outer cover would be cold. Condensation would form there and drip directly onto people and robes. The feeling of safety would thin out. But with the liner, the living space is separated from the cold outer cover by the insulating gap. The liner stays warmer, often warm enough that condensation forms less readily on the side people see. Condensation still forms on the outer cover, yes, but then it has a place to go, down. Water becomes a secret river, flowing along the inside of the outer cover until it meets the liner, transferring to the outer surface of that inner wall, slipping into the darkness of the gap, traveling downward where no one needs to watch it. Gravity does the work. Follow it. It arrives at the height where the liner is tied to the poles. The liner is attached with loops and ties, leaving room for water to pass around and continue. It moves down the outer surface of the liner in thin films, quiet, almost soundless. At the bottom, the liner does not stop in midair. It extends to the ground and is tucked beneath the floor layers. This tucking is careful. The hide edge is laid flat, then held down by mats and robes. Weight becomes a seal. Now the water, reaching that tucked edge, can no longer run freely. It must seep. Hide absorbs enough moisture to slow it. The wetness spreads sideways along the tucked section, thinning out. Then it passes into the willow mats. Those woven rods draw water through small spaces, wicking it gradually away. From the mats, moisture finds the earth. The soil below is porous, full of tiny channels left by roots. The water sinks down, not pooling, dispersing into deep time. Even in a long storm, the amount that reaches this hidden drainage is usually modest. It arrives slowly and continuously, and because it is guided, it never becomes a disaster. Along the bottom edge of the outer cover, tiny spaces still allow air to enter the world between walls. Cold outside air slips in low, close to the earth, but it does not rush across the sleeping robes. It rises through the channel, warming as it climbs alongside the liner. By the time it reaches the top edge of the liner, it is tempered. Fresh air arrives, warmed before it joins the upper space and exits through the smoke hole. So the shelter breathes without drafts. Outside, the world remains enormous. Thunder travels with a delay. Lightning sometimes shows the stitching for a heartbeat, then returns everything to firelight. The poles may creak softly, not a crack of failure, but a groan of flexing under load, like timbers yielding so they do not break. And because the system is working, people can do what might seem impossible to someone standing exposed under that violent sky. They can rest. Children yield first. A robe is pulled over them, tucked close the way the liner is tucked, making a small seal of comfort. A hand rests on a child's back, feeling breath rise and fall. Adults sit quietly. Some mend a seam, Some sharpen a tool. Some simply watch the coals and let their thoughts drift. The sound of rain becomes a constant, a low percussion that no longer feels threatening. If you are listening now, here by my fire, let your own breath follow that idea. Let the storm of thought pass around you. Let the edges of your mind be the outer cover, and the calm center be protected by layers. Before the rain fully commits, there is often a brief window when the sky is still deciding. The air smells of ozone and dampened dust. Birds go quiet. Horses bunch together with their backs to the wind. Dogs drift closer to the lodges, as if they know the circle is about to close. Inside the teepee, that knowledge is already in the hands of the person responsible for it. Stakes are checked first. You move around the perimeter, fingers finding each wooden peg in the soil, testing for looseness. If one gives, it is driven deeper with a firm push, sometimes with a mallet, sometimes with the heel of a hand. The hide at the bottom edge is pulled smooth, not tight enough to tear, but tight enough to remove slack. Slack can flap, flapping can pull, pulling can make gaps. The goal is quiet strength. Then the smoke flaps. The flap poles are long, often as tall as a person, sometimes taller, and they have a feel in the hand that is both simple and important. Smooth wood, slightly damp from air. When you reposition them, you are not yanking, you are guiding, like steering something that wants to cooperate if you treat it respectfully. You step outside for just a moment. The door flap lifts, and the storm breath touches your face. The ground has begun to soften. Dust turns to clay underfoot. You glance up at the peak, and you can see the flaps outlined against the moving sky. You move the windward pole. The leather shifts. The opening changes shape. Back inside, you watch the smoke. A small fire sends up a ribbon of gray, and it rises toward the top like a thought, spiraling a little in the cone. If the flaps are too closed, the ribbon hesitates, then spreads, pressing down into the living space. If the flaps are too open, you hear a different sound, a faint hiss of rain catching the edge, a small drip that does not belong. So you adjust again. A few inches can change everything. It is delicate work done in weather that is not delicate. When the rain finally arrives in earnest, the cover begins its transformation. Dry bison hide has a warm, golden brown tone. With the first heavy drops, dark stains bloom outward. The surface changes. It is not only color, it is feel. Moisture enters the fibers, and as those fibers take in water, they swell. It sounds like it should make the hide looser, but it does the opposite. Swelling fibers crowd each other, and the whole sheet tightens, pulling drum tight over the poles. Wrinkles smooth out. Loose areas become taut. If you tap the wall with fingertips, the sound changes from a soft thud to a clearer resonance, a deep drum note that seems to belong to the storm itself. At the seams, sinew thread responds too. Sinew absorbs moisture and swells, filling needle holes, plugging tiny paths where water might otherwise creep through. It is one of those quietly brilliant material traits that feels almost like a spell, except it is simply biology and experience. When the storm comes, the shelter seals itself. The weight of the wet cover increases. You can feel it in the way the poles settle more firmly into the earth. The junction at the top is pressed tighter. The structure becomes harder to shift. It is another strange kindness. The heavier the storm makes the skin, the more stable the bones become. And still, the storm keeps testing. Rain slants sideways with gusts. The wind finds the cone and flows around it, humming. Sometimes a gust is strong enough that you hear the poles answer with a low groan, like a ship's ribs. But the sound does not mean failure. It means the teepee is flexing, yielding so it does not break. Thunder arrives as a reminder of the vast sky beyond the walls. A flash may come first, brightening everything for a heartbeat, turning the liner almost white, making every tie and seam visible. Then the darkness returns, and you wait for the sound. 1, 2, 3. A slow count. The numbers shrink and expand through the night as the storm shifts its distance, and the counting becomes oddly soothing, like a metronome for patience. Inside, the soundscape layers itself. Rain on hide is the main rhythm, deep and resonant. Wind adds a low tone, rising and falling. The fire adds its own small language, crackle, pop, a hiss when a piece of wood releases a pocket of moisture. People add softer sounds, the rustle of hide clothing, the slide of a robe being pulled closer, the muted clink of a tool set down carefully so it does not startle a sleeping child. All of this happens while water, unseen, is being guided down hidden surfaces, and fresh air is being warmed on its way upward between the walls. So when someone closes their eyes, they are not pretending the storm is gone. They are letting it exist outside, while they remain inside a small, warm geometry that has learned how to survive. Hold that feeling with me. In the next stretch, we will stay with the fire and the floor, with the way warmth is banked and layered, with the small rituals that make a round space feel like a real room, and with the slow settling of bodies into sleep. Now let us return to the center, where everything glows. Even in a storm, even when the wind is pushing hard against the hide and the rain is drumming like 1,000 soft hands, the fire remains the heart. Not an angry fire, not a roaring spectacle, a controlled warmth, measured carefully, because wood on the plains can be scarce, and because the home itself asks for respect. If you look closely at the fire pit, you see that it is not accidental. It is a shallow depression, maybe 2 feet across, a little bowl in the earth. Sometimes it is lined with stones, chosen with care. Not every stone can handle heat without cracking. Families learn which ones hold up, the ones that do not split when warmed and cooled again and again. Those stones become familiar objects, blackened, smoothed by hands, warmed by years. During the day they drink in heat. At night, when flames are lowered. To have coals to bank at night, you must build the fire in the first place, and that is a story of patience. Fire begins with tinder, the smallest, most eager material. Dry grass shredded fine, bark fibers teased apart until they are soft as dust, cattail down, dried fungus. The tinder must be kept dry, wrapped in hide or stored in something that resists moisture, because rain can make starting a fire feel like trying to coax a song from a wet drum. Kindling comes next. Thin sticks, thumb-thick twigs, arranged so air can slip through. Fire needs oxygen, and people learn quickly that crowded sticks smother. So kindling is laid with small gaps, a loose cone or a gentle crisscross, like a tiny scaffold waiting for heat. Then the fuel wood, thicker pieces, wrist-sized, cut to lengths that fit the pit. Dry wood burns cleanly. Wet wood smokes. Green wood hisses and sulks. On the plains, the difference matters. Cottonwood and willow from rivers burn quickly and smell slightly sweet. Pine, when available, burns hotter and longer. Hardwood like oak or ash, sometimes obtained by trade, is prized because it burns long and steady. Every piece is gathered and carried, and that labor makes people careful with fire. Sometimes a coal from the previous fire is carried when the camp moves a short distance. A glowing ember wrapped in punk wood or damp moss, kept alive like a small heart. If no coal survives, fire must be made from scratch. Bow drill, friction, the steady spinning of wood against wood until a tiny coal forms, fragile as a breath. It is not quick. It requires calm. I have always thought that making fire this way teaches the body patience, the kind that grows without force. Once flame is born in the tinder, it is fed. Kindling catches. A small bright tongue of fire begins to lick upward. Larger pieces are added gradually. Too much, too soon, will smother the young fire. So the fire is grown like a living thing, allowed to strengthen, allowed to make coals all day. It is tended in small gestures, a single piece added when needed, coals stirred to knock ash away so heat can breathe, a glance upward to see whether smoke is rising cleanly toward the opening. Fire tending is not separate from life. People sit near the fire anyway. They work near it. They talk near it. The fire is watched almost unconsciously, like someone listening to a child's breathing. Now let us slow down at the floor, because the floor is where sleep actually happens. When a teepee is raised at a new place, the ground inside is inspected. Stones are removed. Sharp sticks, anything that would press into a hip later. If the soil slopes, it is scraped and leveled. Then mats go down. Willow rods woven into panels that can be rolled and carried. You overlap the edges a little, closing gaps, creating a continuous surface. The rods are cool at first, smelling faintly of riverbank. As the mats settle, you hear a soft creak and then stillness. Those mats lift the living surface above soil and trap air between rods, a quiet insulation. In winter, dried grass might be spread beneath. In summer, layers might be fewer to let the earth's coolness temper heat. On top of mats, in the sitting and sleeping zones, come the robes, heavy bison fur, warm to the touch, placed carefully, overlapping. Near the fire pit, a ring of bare mat remains clear, because sparks are real. Further out, a ring of robes for sitting. Further still, near the walls, thicker layering for sleeping. Along the perimeter, the liner's bottom edge is tucked under everything. Liner, mats, robes. Weight makes a seal. Drafts do not crawl in at floor level. Water, if it finds its hidden path, is guided away along the wall. Storage rests like quiet sentinels. Parfleches stacked. Rawhide containers, sometimes painted, their shapes catching firelight. They hold dried meat, tools, extra clothing. They also add another layer between people and the outer wall, another pocket of still air. Inside this small geography, people find their places. The back, opposite the door, is honored. The sides are lived in. Sleeping places are arranged like spokes around the fire, heads toward walls, feet toward warmth. As evening settles, bright flames are allowed to lower. The fire is guided into a bed of coals. Coals provide steady heat without bright light. To bank the fire, coals are gathered into a compact pile. Ash is raked over them, insulating. A couple of thicker pieces may be placed on top to burn slowly. Too much ash, and the fire dies. Too little, and it burns too quickly. The right balance is learned over years, passed down like a small secret. Let us slow the scene even further, as if we are watching by candlelight, one small motion at a time. The fire does not leap without invitation. It is coaxed. Someone kneels near the pit, the movement careful so robes are not dragged too close to embers. Knees press into mats. Hands hover for a moment, judging heat by feel. A stick shifts a coal. The coal brightens, then settles. A single piece of kindling is set across the glow. Not thrown, placed. You can hear the faintest crack as it begins to catch. Then a whispering flame. Brief, steady. Smoke rises, and above, in the upper space beyond the liner, it finds its path. When the flaps are set well, the smoke seems to be pulled, not merely drifting. It lifts and disappears into the opening, leaving the living space clear. People on the plains learn to read wood the way others read books. Cottonwood burns fast, its smoke slightly sweet, its heat quick. Willow, similar, useful for short needs. Pine, when it can be found or traded for, burns hotter and longer, its scent sharper. Hardwood, when it appears, is treated like treasure, dense, heavy, slow burning, the kind of wood that turns to long-lasting coals, perfect for banking at night. In storm weather, fuel matters even more. You do not want a fire that demands constant feeding, because hands need to rest. You do not want a fire so large that it makes the space uncomfortable. You want steady warmth, a calm center. So the fire is sized to the shelter. It is kept moderate. People have learned that a small fire can feel large inside a well-insulated space. The liner holds heat. The air gap slows loss. The robes hold warmth close to bodies. The stones near the pit store and return heat in slow waves. I like to imagine those stones as a kind of memory, heat saved from earlier hours, released when the night becomes deepest. Now think about safety, because safety is a shadow that always sits near fire. A pop from a burning log can send a spark outward. Most sparks land harmlessly on the bare mats in the fire zone. But everyone knows to watch. If a spark lands on fur, it is brushed away immediately with a quick, practiced motion. Some families keep a little container of water nearby, not for comfort, but for emergency. Yet water is valuable, so the main defense is attention. Children learn early. Do not run inside. Do not play too close. Do not throw anything toward the center. They learn these rules not as harsh commands, but as part of the household rhythm, the same way they learn where to place tools, where to sit when guests arrive. The organization of the interior is, in a way, an architecture of calm. The center is the most public. Anyone can approach the fire. It is where cooking happens, where warmth is shared. Beyond that is the ring of activity, sitting, working, talking. Further out, near the wall, is privacy, sleeping places, personal bundles, the quiet zones where a person can turn inward. And along the wall, parfleches and tools are placed with intention. A bow rests where it can be reached. A knife sits in a safe spot. A water bag is kept away from the fire. The liner makes the wall feel close, like a room wall, something you can lean against. When people prepare for sleep, they do it in small steps. First, the last tasks are finished. A seam mended by the firelight, a piece of food tucked away so it stays dry, a child wiped clean with a soft cloth. Then the fire is guided down. Wood is not piled on. It is allowed to burn into coals. Banking begins. The coals are gathered with a stick, drawn inward into a compact mound. Ash is pulled over them, a blanket of gray dust that slows the burn. A thicker stick or two is placed on top, positioned so it will catch slowly, feeding the coals through the night. The motion is gentle, almost sleepy in itself. You do not want bright flame now. You want the steady red glow that warms without waking. The light changes with this. Bright gold becomes a softer red. Shadows deepen. The liner glows less, and the teepee feels even more like a private cave of warmth. Outside, rain continues. Inside, its sound becomes part of the room. Rain on high deepens as the cover tightens. Wind hums around the cone. Thunder arrives as a rounded rumble. Lightning sometimes makes the liner briefly bright. Then everything returns to warm darkness. Sometimes, stories continue in these moments, but they are not sharp stories. They are slow, familiar accounts. A time when the bison moved differently. A winter when the snow came early. A place along a river where willow grows thick. A relative who taught someone how to tan hide so it stays soft. The stories carry darker edges because the land demands respect, because loss is part of memory. But the telling is meant to soothe. It is meant to remind children that knowledge exists, that routines exist, that the community has endured. Rain keeps drumming. Wind keeps humming. Thunder keeps rolling. Inside, breath slows. You can hear it if you listen. Several people breathing in a small space creates a gentle rhythm. It mixes with the rain rhythm until it is hard to tell where one ends and the other begins. Fire crackle, becomes softer as coals settle. Occasionally a coal shifts, a tiny click, then silence again. And if someone wakes for a moment in the deepest night, they do not sit up and panic. They simply check with senses. Warmth still present. Smoke not heavy. Rain still outside. The center holding. Then they sink back down, as if the storm itself is rocking them, and the teepee is a cradle shaped by generations. We will stay with that rocking next, staying longer in the night, listening to rain and breath and the slow movement of time, until the storm begins to tire and morning waits, pale and quiet, beyond the door. Night does not arrive all at once on the plains. It seeps in. Even with storm clouds swallowing the last color of evening, there is usually a slow fade, as if the world is being dimmed by an unseen hand. Outside the teepee, the grass becomes a dark surface that moves when the wind passes over it. The horizon disappears, not because it is gone, but because the rain makes a veil between the eye and distance. Inside, that veil becomes sound. Rain is no longer individual drops. It is a continuous texture, a thick, woven cloth of noise laid over the hide. The hide is taut now, darkened, heavier, and the drumming deepens. It is not harsh. It is rounded. Each impact spreads across the surface and returns as a low pulse, like a heartbeat that the whole shelter shares. If you were standing here with me, close enough to feel the fire's warmth on your cheek, you might notice how the sound changes depending on where you sit. Near the wall, the rain feels larger, more intimate, as if the storm is right there, pressing its ear to the hide. Closer to the center, near the coals, the rain becomes a wider background, a steady ocean behind the smaller sounds of domestic life. Wind moves around the cone and becomes a voice of its own. When the gusts rise, there is a soft moan, a low, drawn-out note. When the gusts fall away, the note thins, and you can hear the rain more clearly again. Sometimes, the wind makes the door flap twitch, not violent, not ripping, just a reminder that there is an opening, a seam between inside and outside. That seam is watched. A person will glance toward it now and then, not with fear, but with the habit of responsibility. Is the bottom edge still anchored? Are the stakes holding? Is the cover still smooth? Even in the dark, hands know how to find these answers. Fingers touch the hide near the ground. They feel tension. They feel dampness. They feel the quiet strength of a system doing what it was made to do. In the upper space above the liner, smoke lingers like a thin cloud, but it stays high, outside the living zone. This space is like an attic, a place where heat and smoke travel and then leave. Sometimes you can see it if you look up, the faintest gray moving toward the opening, the way breath disappears into cold air. The fire itself is not much to look at now. That is the point. Bright flame has been reduced to coals, and the coals glow like buried stars. If you stare long enough, you see small collapses, tiny shifts, as wood turns to charcoal, as ash settles. Every so often there is a soft crack, not loud, just a small release of tension. The kind of sound that makes you want to exhale. The stones around the pit are warm. They do not glow, but they hold heat. You can feel it if you extend a hand toward them, palm open. It is a slow warmth, steady, patient, a stored warmth, like memory that does not speak loudly, but does not leave. People begin to arrange themselves for sleep with a similar patience. There is no rushing. There is no flurry. The storm is outside and it is steady, so there is no need for sudden movement. Robes are pulled closer, edges overlapped. A corner is tucked under a shoulder. Another corner is tucked beneath knees. Someone adjusts the position of a child, turning them slightly, so their face is warmer, so their breathing is easier. You can hear the soft hush of fur being brushed by a hand. That sound is quiet, but it is comforting. It says, yes, you are covered. Yes, you are held. The liner makes the walls feel near. It turns the big cone into a room. And because the liner is warm on the inside and the air gap is doing its insulating work, the air around sleeping bodies stays steady, not too cold near the floor, not stifling near the fire. There is a middle zone that feels just right, and people know where it is, the way a person knows where a blanket should sit on the chest. On storm nights, the teepee is full of little decisions made long ago by others. Some decisions are obvious. The cone shape sheds water. It gives wind no flat surface to grab. The steep angle makes rain slide down without pooling. Those are ideas you can explain in a single sentence. But there are quieter decisions too. The choice to tuck the liner under mats and robes. The choice to leave a small gap along the bottom edge of the cover so air can enter and rise between walls. The way smoke flaps are shaped so they can overlap and still create a narrow channel. The way sinew swells and seals. The way hide tightens when wet. Each of these is a small fact, almost ordinary. Together they become something that feels like protection. Some scholars talk about this in modern terms, calling it passive environmental control, calling it aerodynamic ventilation, calling it thermal buffering. Those phrases are accurate, but they feel cold compared to what it is like to sit inside and simply feel the results. The design is not just clever, it is intimate. It is tuned to the human body, to breath and warmth and sleep. And that tuning is not an accident. It is a kind of inheritance. Picture a woman sitting with other women in summer light, scraping hides with bone tools. Picture the repetitive motion, the hours, the smell of rawhide and the sharp scent of wet earth, flies brushed away, conversation drifting and returning. The work is heavy, but it is steady. Each hide is transformed slowly, carefully, because the future depends on it. Then picture brain tanning, the hide soaking, then being worked and pulled and flexed for hours so it does not dry stiff. Hands learn the feel of the change. Stiffness becoming softness, resistance giving way. Smoke treatment after that, cool smoke, not hot, a controlled pit, the hide arranged like a tent above it. The smoke smells sweet and earthy. It coats fibers. It makes water less welcome. This is what I mean when I say the tipi is full of decisions. It carries labor inside its walls. It carries knowledge. It carries time. And on a night like this, with rain trying to push in, that time is what keeps the living space calm. Even when water does find a seam, even when moisture penetrates in thin films, the liner catches it. Water transfers to the outer surface of the liner and travels down in darkness. It is almost eerie to think about water moving between two walls, flowing silently while the people on the other side sleep. A hidden river that never becomes a flood because it is guided. Sometimes, if the storm is long, you might smell dampness in the air gap, not inside the living space, but faintly, like a cool scent from behind a curtain. The smell of wet leather has its own character, earthy, heavy. It mixes with smoke smell. It becomes the scent of home in bad weather. The sound of thunder continues, but it changes. Far away, it is a low roll that seems to come from everywhere. Closer, it becomes more distinct. A deeper growl that arrives after lightning brightens the hide for a blink. Inside the tipi, thunder feels softened. The hide walls take the sharpness away. It becomes a rounded presence, like the world clearing its throat. Children are often the first to stop reacting to it. They listen for a while, then their bodies decide it is safe, and they let go. Their breathing slows, their hands unclench. They nestle into fur and warmth and drift. Adults may stay awake longer, not because they fear the storm, but because their minds are trained to watch. They listen for changes in wind direction. They notice if smoke begins to hesitate. They notice if the rain sound shifts from heavy to even heavier. If gusts begin to push, and if adjustment is needed, it is done with calm. A person might rise slowly, careful not to step on sleeping bodies. Feet touch mats. The mats are slightly cool compared to fur. The person moves toward the door flap, lifts it just enough, and a blade of cold air slips in. It smells of wet grass and electricity. The wind pushes lightly at the opening, and the person leans into it, steadying themselves. Outside, they can barely see beyond the circle of other lodges. Everything is rain. Everything is movement. The firelight inside makes the opening behind them glow. They find the smoke flap pole. The pole is wet with rain. It feels smooth and cold. They shift it a few inches. Just a small change, closing the windward flap a bit more, opening the leeward channel. They listen. Rain is striking from a slightly different angle now. The person adjusts again, then returns inside, sealing the door flap. Immediately, warmth surrounds them again. The contrast is so sharp, it feels almost like stepping into a different world. Inside, the smoke behaves. It rises cleanly. Breath feels easy. The storm stays outside. That is the strange comfort of good shelter. It does not deny the danger. It simply makes it irrelevant to your body. And when the body feels safe, the mind begins to loosen its grip. If you are listening to my voice right now, let yourself borrow that lesson. Let the storm be outside. Let it drum. Let it roll. Let it move across the wide, dark plains of thought. You remain in the center, in a warm ring of fur and fire, your breath steady, your jaw softening, your shoulders sinking. There is another sound you might notice when the night is deep. It is the sound of the tipi settling under weight, not a crack, not a snap, a slow creak, like wood adjusting to pressure. Poles leaning inward are held by the weight of the wet cover, pressed together at the top. The structure becomes more locked the longer the rain continues. That locking is quiet. It is not dramatic. It is simply stability becoming more stable. Even the soil under the poles participates. Wet earth grips wood. Friction increases. The pole ends wedge more firmly into the ground. A teepee that might be shifted by hand when dry becomes nearly immovable when wet and weighted. The storm, trying to push, becomes the thing that anchors. Outside the wall, water streams down the hide, carrying dust and soot and traces of the day. It runs to the ground and disappears into soil. Inside the wall, a different kind of water moves, condensation and seepage guided down the liner, soaked into mats, into earth, a slow, invisible drainage. Nothing piles up, nothing bursts. It is all gradual, and gradual is what allows sleep. By the time the night reaches its deepest hours, the storm has usually found a steady pattern. It may still be strong, but it is less chaotic. Wind gusts become more predictable. Rain intensity rises and falls like breathing. Thunder grows more distant. In that steady pattern, human breathing joins. One person exhales, another inhales. A child sighs in sleep. Someone shifts, and the robe makes a soft whisper. The coals glow and dim as ash settles. The sound of rain continues, constant, layered, and the mind begins to treat it like white noise, like the ocean, like a lullaby that is older than words. And somewhere between those sounds, you can feel the sense of a circle holding. Outside, the world is wide and exposed. Inside, the world is small and arranged. The circle of the camp, the circle of the fire, the circle of robes, the circle of the liner attachments, each one a ring of order in a night that could easily become disorder. This is not just engineering. It is also culture. It is also care. A home that can be taken down and carried still becomes a true home because of the way people inhabit it, the way they maintain it, the way they teach the next generation to read wind and hide and smoke. And as sleep deepens, the storm becomes less like a threat and more like a background story being told around the edges of your awareness, while the center remains warm. Soon, very soon, the storm will begin to move on, not suddenly, but slowly, leaving behind a world rinsed clean. And we will follow that shift toward morning, listening for the first changes, feeling how the teepee prepares to release the night. Before that happens, there is a moment I always return to in my mind. It is the moment when someone, half awake, reaches out in the dark and touches the liner beside them. The hide is warm, where firelight has been breathing on it. It is smooth, slightly textured, carrying faint traces of smoke and time. The hand rests there as if on a wall in a familiar room. You know that feeling when you wake briefly at night and cannot remember where you are, just for a second, and then your hand finds the edge of a blanket, the shape of a pillow, the solidity of a bedside table, and your mind settles again. That is what this touch does. It tells the body, you are still inside, you are still held. The storm is still outside. You can go back down into sleep. The hand withdraws. The breath evens out. The rain continues. It's deep drumming. The fire stays low and steady. And the night keeps moving forward, one slow, quiet step at a time. Morning on the plains can feel unreal after a storm. The first change is not light, it is sound. You notice, half asleep, that the rain has thinned. The drumming is no longer a solid wall, it becomes a softer patter, then a scattered tapping, then a silence that is almost too quiet at first. The wind still moves, but it has lost its sharp edge. It sighs instead of moaning. Inside the teepee, the air feels different when the storm loosens its grip. The smell of smoke is still present, but now there is another scent drifting in, a fresh, damp scent, like earth that has been turned over. The fire is mostly coals now, but the stones are still warm. That stored warmth keeps the sleeping bodies comfortable, even as outside air cools. People do not jump up when the storm ends. They rise slowly, as if they are waking from the storm itself. A person sits up on the robes, hair flattened, eyes half open. They listen for a moment, letting the new quiet settle. They can hear things that were hidden all night. A dog shifting outside, a horse snorting and stamping, the faint drip of water from the cover onto grass. That drip is an important detail. It means water is leaving. It means the hide has held and shed and now releases what it does not need. It also means the cover is still heavy, still dark, and as it begins to dry, it will change again, slowly loosening, slowly returning to its lighter color. The teepee is always adjusting. It does not stay fixed. It responds. Someone adds a small piece of wood to the coals, not a big log, a modest piece, dry if possible. The wood catches gradually. A small flame appears, then another. The flame does not roar. It whispers. It warms the hands that hold it in their sight. You can almost feel the whole interior inhale with that new flame. Light grows, and the liner glows in warm color. The paintings, if there are any, become visible again. A symbol of protection, a memory of a vision, a pattern that makes the walls feel personal. If you were standing here with me, you would see how organized the space is, even after a long night. Items placed along the perimeter remain where they belong. Parfleches stacked, tools set aside, clothing folded. A home is made not only by shelter, but by the way things have their place. That order matters on a morning like this. Outside, the world is messy, wet grass flattened by wind, small streams of water in shallow depressions, puddles that reflect a gray sky. The teepee is a small island of order. A person might lift the door flap carefully. Cold air enters, but it is not violent now. It is calm. It carries the smell of wet prairie. The light outside is pale, filtered by lingering cloud. The camp circle is still there. Other lodges stand in their places, their covers dark with rain. Smoke rises from some of them, thin and straight now that wind has softened. People move slowly between them, wrapped in robes or blankets, speaking in quiet voices. No one celebrates the storm passing as if it were a miracle. Storms come, storms go. What matters is that the home held, and it did. The first work of mourning is often to check everything without drama. Stakes are inspected. The cover is touched. The smoke flaps are adjusted back toward a more open position so smoke can rise freely. In some cases, the bottom edge of the cover may be lifted a little more to let air flow and help drying. Those adjustments are small, but they are part of the ongoing relationship between shelter and weather. Sometimes, Water has entered in the hidden ways we talked about, along the poles, down the outer surface of the liner, into mats, into soil. The sleeping robes remain dry, and that is what matters. If any dampness is found near the edge, it is dealt with simply. A mat is shifted, a robe is shaken, air is invited in. The simple actions carry a quiet expertise. Honestly, I have always found it strange and beautiful that so much of this expertise is about letting nature do what it will, but guiding it gently. Rain is not fought, it is encouraged to run downward. Wind is not blocked with flat walls, it is allowed to flow around curves. Smoke is not trapped, it is given a path, and even a draft, pulled upward by low pressure created by the storm itself. Even condensation, that sneaky moisture that ruins so many shelters, is handled by a surface that stays warm enough to resist it, and by a liner that catches what forms and sends it down to earth. It is a design full of acceptance. Acceptance is not surrender, it is intelligence. The plains, with their open sky and fast storms, have always been a place that teaches this lesson. You cannot dominate the weather here. You cannot outmuscle it. You can only understand it, and then build something that works with it. That understanding came from generations of watching. Watching clouds darken in the west, watching wind shift, watching rain strike hide and make it tighten, watching seams seal, watching a cover sag if it is poorly cut, watching poles creak if the angle is wrong, watching smoke back up if the flaps are misread, watching children shiver if the liner is not tucked properly, and then correcting, adjusting, teaching. There is a quiet darkness to this, not a horror, but a weight, because the knowledge was not gathered in a comfortable laboratory. It was gathered in real storms, real winters, real hunger, real danger. People learned because they had to. If a cover failed, if seams leaked too much, if a fire could not be kept alive, the consequences were not theoretical. That is the shadow behind the calm. We do not need to linger on it in a sharp way. We can let it be like a distant thundercloud, present but far. The important thing is that the knowledge held, and because it held, the morning can arrive gently. As the day begins, tasks resume. Someone might step out to check horses, moving through wet grass that clings to ankles. The grass is cold, but the air is fresh. The person can feel the ground giving slightly, softened by rain. Footsteps make a faint squelch, then a soft release. The smell of wet earth rises with each step. They bring back news. The herd is safe. The storm moved east. The sky is still heavy, but there are lighter patches. Inside the teepee, a pot may be set near the fire, water warmed, not boiled violently, just warmed until steam curls. Hands hover over it, feeling heat. A child may sip slowly. A person may rub warmth into stiff fingers. The fire is fed with care, because wood is still precious. Even after rain, wood does not appear magically. It must be found along rivers or traded. It must be carried. It must be dried. So the fire remains modest, efficient, like the shelter itself. One of the most intimate parts of the morning is the shaking out of robes. A robe is lifted, heavy with fur and hide. It moves like a slow wave. Dust that settled overnight, tiny crumbs, small bits of grass, all loosen and drift. In dry weather, dust rises in a visible cloud. In damp weather, dust is heavier. It falls quickly. Still, the act is cleansing. It restores loft to fur. It prepares the sleeping place for another night. The mats may be lifted too, at least at the edges, to let air reach the tucked liner. You can almost imagine the hidden water that traveled down in the dark now evaporating slowly, leaving the air gap fresher. The shelter is drying from the inside out. This drying is a slow process, and it reminds me of something about the mind. When fear passes, it does not always vanish instantly. It drips away, it evaporates, it loosens. The body holds tension like wet hide holds water. Then, little by little, the tension releases. If you have ever had a night when thoughts felt like a storm, you know what I mean. The storm may stop, but your body may still be listening for it. Your shoulders might stay raised for a while. Your jaw might still hold. Your breath might still be shallow. So, just like the tipi, the body benefits from gentle drying. Let the breath warm. Let it move slowly. Let it rise through your chest, like warm air rising through the air gap, preheating itself before it reaches your thoughts. Let your mind be the living space inside the liner, protected, calm, not exposed to every gust. There is something else that happens after a storm on the plains. The world feels larger. The sky opens in places, showing pale blue. Sunlight touches the wet grass and turns it into a field of tiny reflections. The horizon returns, and you remember how exposed it all is. You remember that shelter is not automatic here. It is built. It is maintained. It is earned through labor and attention. This is why the tipi feels almost like a spell, a simple cone of poles and hide, and yet it can turn a violent night into a night where children sleep. It can turn thunder into background music. It can turn rain into a steady drum rather than a cold flood. Some people might call it an invention, but it is more like an ongoing conversation with the environment. And the conversation does not end in the morning. Poles may be checked for wear. A seam might be inspected. A small repair might be planned for a day when the weather is clear. Smoke flaps might be retied. The liner may be brushed of soot. Knowledge remains active. Even the camp circle itself participates. The spacing between lodges allows wind to move without creating dangerous turbulence. It allows fires to remain safer, less likely to leap. It gives children space to play when the ground dries. It holds community in a visible arrangement, a pattern that says, we are together, but we respect distance. There is a calm authority in that pattern. It says, we have been here before. We know storms. We know how to return to daily life after them. And now, as the morning deepens, the story begins to widen beyond a single stormy night, because this design, this way of living, existed in a world that would later face profound disruption. The plains would become a place of pressure, of forced movement, of loss, of shrinking numbers in a literal sense. The tipi itself, portable and resilient, would be part of those histories too, carried through upheaval. We will speak of that gently when the time comes, not as a sharp wound, but as a shadow that passes across the firelight. For now, we stay with the morning after rain, with the simple fact that shelter worked, and because it worked, people can keep going. The storm moved on. The home remained. And as the day stretches forward, the mind can rest in that idea, slow and steady, the way a coil of smoke rises and disappears into a brightening sky, guiding us softly toward what comes next. Later in the day, someone might walk a small circle around their own lodge, not because they doubt it, but because routine brings comfort. Their feet press into damp soil near the perimeter, where the poles meet ground. Each pole is a quiet pillar, angled inward, holding the remembered weight of the night. They touch a pole with fingertips. Wood is cool and slightly rough. They feel the grain. They feel the steadiness. They look up at the cover. It is still darker than usual, but already there are lighter streaks where water has run off. In places, small beads cling, then fall. One drop, another, tiny taps against grass. If the sun breaks through, even briefly, the hide begins to change color in front of your eyes. It warms from deep brown toward golden again, and as it dries, it loosens a little, releasing the drum-tight tension that made the night sound so deep. The tipi still speaks in small ways, a soft pop as leather relaxes, a quiet creak as a pole settles. Not alarming, just honest. And in that honesty, there is peace. The camp returns to its usual rhythm. Voices rise a little. Someone laughs softly. A dog shakes water from its coat. Horses graze again, pulling at wet grass. Yet the memory of the night remains, not as fear, but as knowledge. The sky can change quickly. Darkness can arrive fast. The world can roar. And still, a well-made shelter can hold, and a community can hold, and the body can sleep anyway. Keep that feeling with you as we drift onward. The storm has passed, yet its rhythm remains as a soft echo. And as evening begins to gather again somewhere beyond the next horizon, we will return to the deeper history carried inside these portable homes, and the quiet, stubborn ways people kept warmth alive. For now, let your own breathing match the gentle changes we have been listening for. A little softer on the inhale, a little longer on the exhale. Imagine the sound of the last drops slipping off hide. Imagine the earth drinking them without complaint. Imagine the warmth in stones that keep giving heat even after flame has quieted. That is how rest can be. Not a sudden switch, but a gradual settling, a slow release. And when you are ready, we will follow the next thread, deeper into the long timeline of the plains, where weather is only one kind of storm, and where survival sometimes meant carrying home itself across a changing world. There is a particular kind of quiet that comes after you have listened to a storm all night. Not the quiet of silence, exactly. More like the quiet of your mind no longer bracing. The air feels lighter. Your thoughts stop gripping the edges of things. You can rest your attention on small details again, the way you might rest your fingertips on warm stone. And that is where I want to guide you now, into the smaller details that carry the heavier truth, because a teepee is not only a clever shelter, it is also a witness. If you were standing here with me, beside this low fire, you might see how the light touches the hides, how it reveals tiny scars and stitching, the places where a seam was repaired, the places where time pressed, and someone answered. A repair is never just a repair. It is a record. Someone noticed weakness. Someone cared enough to mend it. Someone knew that weather does not ask permission. That same awareness applied to everything. The plains taught people to read signs. The green-black rim of cloud far to the west, the sudden drop of temperature, the smell of ozone and damp dust carried on the wind, horses bunching together, birds growing quiet, children being called in without argument. All of that was knowledge stored in bodies, passed along in gestures and routines. But there were other signs, later, that were harder to read, because they did not come from the sky. They came from people. At first, it may have arrived as a distant rumor carried along trade routes, the way a scent of rain can travel miles ahead of a storm. A new kind of movement, new faces, new objects that glinted strangely in sunlight, new lines drawn on maps that the land itself did not recognize. Some of this history is well documented. Some of it is argued over in details, and we cannot be sure about every timeline, every motive, every exact number. Still, the larger shape is clear. A different storm moved across the plains. It was not made of water and wind. It was made of pressure. Pressure to move. Pressure to sign. Pressure to accept boundaries in a world that had always been open. Pressure that tightened like wet hide, pulling seams taut, leaving less and less slack for a people to breathe. And in that tightening, the teepee remained what it had always been, portable, resilient, a home that could be lifted and carried, a circle that could be rebuilt in a new place. That portability, which once matched the movement of bison herds and seasons, became a different kind of necessity. I have always found it strange that the very feature that made life possible on the plains, the ability to move, later became a wound, because moving was no longer chosen. Moving was demanded. Imagine, for a moment, a camp circle dismantled, not because the grass is eaten down or because winter wind is coming, but because someone else says it must be so. Poles pulled free from ground, the earth releasing them with a soft sigh. Stakes lifted, The cover folded, liner rolled, mats tied, parfleches packed, robes shaken, not leisurely, but quickly, horses loaded, not for a normal seasonal shift, but for a journey shaped by someone else's schedule. The sound of that is not the sound of rain. It is quieter. It is the rustle of hide and canvas, the clink of metal where there was once bone, the short breath of an adult trying to keep fear out of their voice, the careful calm they perform for the children. Children notice anyway. They always do. They notice when adults speak less. They notice when their own names are said in a different tone. They notice when the air carries not only wet grass and smoke, but a faint taste of uncertainty. The plains do not hide uncertainty. There are no forests to swallow it. It sits under the vast sky and becomes part of the horizon. And yet, even with that heaviness, the routines remain. A family still checks stakes. They still read wind direction. They still adjust smoke flaps. They still tuck the liner carefully under mats so drafts do not slice along the floor. They still bank coals at night and sleep with heads toward the walls, feet toward the warmth, because routine is an anchor when everything else becomes unsteady. Water continues to behave as it always has. It falls. It runs down hide. It finds seams. It is guided into hidden channels. It seeps into soil. It evaporates when the sun returns. It leaves behind a faint mineral trace on leather, a pale line like chalk. Wind continues to behave as it always has. It searches for weakness. It presses. It whistles. It shifts. It creates low pressure over smoke flaps and pulls breath out of the shelter. It can be an enemy if you ignore it, a helper if you read it. The land remains open. The sky remains immense. Deep time continues without hurry. That is the calm and eerie part. The part that can make you feel small and strangely comforted at once. Human storms come and go. The prairie grass grows back after fire. Rivers keep breathing in their slow curves. Dust keeps settling on whatever is left behind. If you have ever stood in a museum hush, that careful quiet under dim lights, you know how absence can feel like weather. What is missing is not only people, but the everyday noise of life, the casual conversation, the laughter, the clatter of tools, the barking of dogs, the low singing that might drift through an evening, the sound of hide being scraped, the sound of a child asking a question and an elder answering without hurry. In the quiet, numbers shrink. Some numbers shrank because of sickness that arrived with new contact. Some shrank because of hunger, when bison herds diminished and food systems were disrupted. Some shrank because of policies that aimed to break communities into smaller pieces, easier to manage, easier to forget. It is difficult to speak of this without sharpness, so we will speak of it as we speak of weather, in soft language, in steady rhythm, with the understanding that the darkness is real, but it does not need to pierce you. Think of it as a layer of silt after a flood. Water rises, carrying debris. Water recedes, leaving a new layer behind. A thin deposit that changes the surface of everything. It dries into crust. It cracks. It becomes part of the ground. History leaves layers like that. A family that once moved freely may find itself moving within narrower and narrower boundaries. A camp circle that once chose its place may be told where to stop. A child who once learned wind and hide and smoke flap reading may be taken away to learn a different kind of speech. Some scholars argue about the details of how quickly these changes happened in different regions and how different communities adapted in different ways. But the feeling of tightening is consistent in many accounts. Tightening like wet hide. And still, the tipi stands in memory as a counter-image, a structure that takes a violent storm and turns it into a lullaby. Rain seals the cover. Weight adds stability. Wind improves ventilation. Condensation is guided away. The earth drinks what arrives. The fire remains the center. It is almost mythic in its elegance, and perhaps that is why, Even when people were forced into houses with flat walls and square corners, the memory of the tipi did not disappear. Because the tipi is not only architecture, it is a way of thinking. Work with forces. Accept what is inevitable. Guide what can be guided. Keep the living space calm. You can carry that way of thinking even when the walls are different. You know that feeling when you have to sleep in a strange place, a place that does not feel like yours, and you create comfort with small rituals? You fold your clothing the way you like. You place a cup of water within reach. You adjust the blanket. You dim the light. You breathe slowly and tell your body, this is safe enough. That is the mind building an inner liner. That is the mind trapping a pocket of still air inside the chaos. Even now, as you listen, you can practice that. Let your breath enter at the edges, like cool air entering beneath the cover. Let it rise gently between two layers of attention. Let it warm as it climbs. Let it spill into your thoughts from above, already softened, already kind. In the stories that remain, there is also a stubbornness. The stubbornness of people continuing to camp, continuing to gather, continuing to sew and paint and tell stories, even when the world outside presses. The stubbornness of maintaining knowledge of wind and smoke and water. The stubbornness of remembering that the circle is not only a shape, but a way of being together. If you could walk along a river on the plains, early morning after rain, you would see how water carries memory too. The river breathes, slow and wide. It rises with storms and then settles. It leaves driftwood caught in reeds. It leaves little lines of mud on stones. Those lines show the river's recent height, the way a seam line shows where leather was joined. The river is always writing and erasing. Deep time is like that. It does not preserve everything. It smooths. It covers. It buries. Temples in other parts of the world were buried by sand. On the plains, campsites are covered by grass and silt and wind-blown dust. A hearth becomes a dark stain in soil. A broken tool becomes a small artifact. 100 years later, someone might kneel in the dirt with a brush, moving dust aside carefully, the way you might brush ash off coals to keep them alive. That brushing is gentle. It is slow. It is respectful. It is another kind of shelter. It shelters memory from being completely lost, and when a memory is uncovered, it can feel like finding warmth in stone after the fire has gone low. A warmth you did not expect to still be there. So tonight, as we move toward the deeper end of our story, I want you to hold that warmth. The tipi in the rain is still our center image, but around it, the larger storm of history passes, leaving layers, leaving cracks, leaving quiet. We will not rush through it. We will move slowly, with long pauses, with the softness of fur and the steadiness of coals. In the next part, we will sit with the final quiet, the kind of quiet that comes when night is ending and you realize you have been held through darkness. We will listen to the last drops. We will feel the air change. We will let the mind loosen fully. For now, allow your eyelids to feel heavier. Allow the muscles around your mouth to soften. Let the shoulders drop, as if a weight is being lifted from the top of the poles. The way the cover will lighten when it dries. Outside, if there is still rain in your imagination, let it be gentle now. A fine patter, a faint tapping that becomes part of the background. Inside, keep the fire low. Keep the circle intact, and let the night continue to carry you, slowly, softly, toward its quiet conclusion. Maybe picture it even more closely, just for a moment. A single pole inside the shelter, pale wood darkened by years of smoke, with tiny ridges where hands have gripped it. You can see a thin line of water sliding along the pole, not dramatic, only a quiet trickle, choosing the easy path downward. It reaches the ground at the edge, disappears into soil, and that is that. The living space stays dry. The fire stays bright enough. The family keeps breathing. The genius is not perfection. The genius is forgiveness. There is room for a small leak, because there is also a path for that leak. to become harmless. There is room for condensation, because there is also a way for it to be guided down and away. There is room for wind, because there is also a way to let it help. Honestly, I think that is one of the darkest lessons and one of the gentlest. Nothing is sealed forever. Nothing stays perfectly dry. The world finds its way in, yet we can shape the way it arrives so it does not drown us. If you listen closely, you can hear that lesson in the soundscape. Rain on hide, deep and rounded. Fire, small crackles, a soft hiss when a piece of wood settles. Breathing, slower now, like a tide that does not need to be watched. And beneath all of it, a faint creak from the poles when wind presses, the same kind of creak you might hear in an old house, reminding you that shelter is alive in its own way, responding rather than resisting. When the storm outside begins to thin, the rhythm changes. The drumming becomes less dense, more spaced, like fingers tapping less often on a drumhead. In those spaces, you can sometimes hear water dripping from the smoke flaps, a single drop falling, then another, then nothing for a while. You can imagine a child noticing that pattern and drifting even deeper into sleep because the world is clearly calming. And you can imagine an adult noticing too, not with excitement, but with a quiet gratitude that does not need words. This is the moment we will carry into the next part. The long night has done its work. The shelter has done its work. The body has begun to trust the dark. Soon, the sky will lighten at the far edge. The horizon will become visible again. The grass will shine with moisture. The air will smell clean, like washed stone and damp clay. But for now, let us stay in the in-between. The last hours before dawn, the hours when time feels thick, when dreams come like slow animals, when everything inside you is allowed to soften. Stay with me there. In the last hours before dawn, the world becomes simpler. Not because the world is actually simple, but because your attention is no longer scattered. It gathers itself the way coals gather under ash. It holds warmth in a small, steady place. If you were here with me, you would see that the fire has changed. It is no longer bright flame. It is mostly glow. The stones around the pit have stored heat all night, and now they return it slowly, like memory returning in tiny pieces when you wake from a deep dream. The rain, too, has changed. It may still be falling, but it is not striking with the same heavy insistence. The hide cover is already saturated, already tightened, already doing its work. The sound becomes less like a drum line and more like a soft, continuous brushing, a thin sheet of water sliding down the outside, the way a hand slides along leather when you check a seam. Inside, the air is clean enough to breathe easily. The smoke flaps have been adjusted again and again through the night. Each adjustment a small conversation with wind. Close a little, open a little, listen, feel, decide. The shelter responds. The fire responds. The people respond. That is the pattern. Response. And if we widen our lens again, beyond this single night, that same pattern becomes a kind of quiet philosophy, a way to survive what cannot be stopped. Some of the darkest history is the history of being told you must stop moving, even when your life depends on movement. Some of the darkest history is the history of being told you must move, even when your roots are in a particular bend of river, a particular hill, a particular line of cottonwoods where you know the birds by sound. Those two commands contradict each other, and yet they were both placed on the same people at different times by different hands. Stop, go, stay, leave. It can make the mind feel like a rope pulled from both ends. Still, in the middle of those pressures, there were nights like this. Nights when a family lay on robes with fur against their cheeks, and the world outside did whatever it did, and inside there was warmth and a rhythm that could be trusted for a few hours. The knowledge in their hands and in their bodies had not been erased, not yet. Not completely, A child might wake briefly, not from fear, but from a shift in sound, a lull in rain, a new angle of wind, a small pop from the fire. The child lifts their head a little. The liner is there, close, glowing amber in firelight. The upper cone above the liner is darker, smoky, a shadowed dome where the last thin ribbons of smoke drift up and out. The child sees the silhouettes of adults, the shape of a shoulder, the curve of a blanket, the small movement of a hand turning a robe edge so it covers a foot. Then the child lies down again, because nothing is demanding attention. The storm is outside. The storm stays outside. And there is something almost eerie about that safety, not because it is false, but because it is so complete. To be held while the sky rages, to be dry while water runs only inches away in hidden channels, to sleep while thunder rolls over the prairie as if the whole world is a drum. Sometimes I think the human heart needs a few of those nights to keep going. A few nights where you can say, without argument, I am protected right now. Even if tomorrow is uncertain, the liner does its quiet work. Any moisture that reaches the inner side of the outer cover is intercepted and guided. It travels down in thin films, not in dramatic drops. It reaches the tucked edge, and the willow mats accept it. The earth accepts it. The earth is patient. The earth is always accepting. That can be comforting, and it can also be the darkest thought of all, because the earth accepts everything. Eventually, it accepts ash. It accepts bone. It accepts broken tools. It accepts forgotten names. It accepts the footprints of a camp circle, and then it smooths them away with grass. Deep time is gentle in that way, and also relentless. So we will not fight deep time tonight. We will let it be what it is. We will let the thought pass through like wind passing around a cone, not grabbing, not tearing, only flowing. If you notice any worry in your chest as I say these things, imagine it as pressure building on a flat wall. Then imagine the wall becoming curved. Imagine your worry being deflected, split, guided around you, leaving you standing. You do not have to hold it. You can let it pass. Now, listen to the space between sounds. Between one drip and the next, between one breath and the next, between one crackle of coal and the next. In that space, you might notice the faintest sound of movement at the edge of the shelter, a dog shifting position, a person turning, the soft scrape of hide on hide, the whisper of a robe being pulled higher. You might also notice the smell, smoked leather, earthy and slightly sweet, damp grass, a trace of ozone still lingering in the air outside, the warm animal scent of fur, the mineral scent of wet soil. It is a scent that says, the world is wet, but you are warm. And as the night leans toward morning, the temperature changes again, not sharply, just a slow easing. The cold edge softens. The air stops feeling like a blade and starts feeling like a cloth. Outside, the sky is still dark, but it is a different kind of dark. The deepest black begins to thin near the horizon, a gray that is almost invisible at first, the kind of gray you might mistake for your own tired eyes. But it is there. It grows by degrees. This is where the story of the tipi in the rain always ends, in the ordinary miracle of a storm passing. And yet, I do not want to leave you with only the weather. I want to leave you with the deeper model that tipi offers. Because this structure is a lesson written in wood and hide and air, it teaches that you can build layers. You can create an outer wall that takes the first impact, that sheds most of what strikes it. You can create an inner liner that protects what matters most, that keeps your breathing space calm. You can trap air, still air, and let it do the quiet work of insulation. You can accept that a little water may enter, and you can give it a harmless path. You can use wind to create a draft that clears smoke. You can bank coals so warmth lasts longer than flame. These are engineering truths, yes, but also emotional truths. When life becomes loud, you can build a liner. When demands press from every side, you can make a channel for them to flow through without soaking you. When losses pile up like wet weight, you can let that weight lock you to what is stable instead of collapsing you. This does not erase the dark history. Nothing erases it. Some knowledge was taken. Some language was punished. Some children were separated from the rhythms that once made them feel safe. Some camps were broken apart. Some circles were forced to open and never quite close the same way again. But there is also continuity. There are families who remember. There are hands that still know how to sew, how to scrape, how to smoke hides, how to read wind. There are gatherings where old songs return like embers flaring when ash is stirred. There are artists who paint symbols again, not as museum artifacts, but as living marks. And there is the simple fact that the rain still falls, the wind still moves, the earth still drinks, and people still find ways to sleep. That is not a neat ending. It is not a clean moral. It is only true. So, in this last stretch, I want to guide you into sleep the way a woman might guide water down a liner. No force, no hurry. Just a path. Let your jaw loosen. Let your tongue rest. Let your shoulders sink. Feel the weight of your body pressing into whatever supports you, bed or pillow or blanket. Let that weight be stabilizing, not heavy, like the wet cover pressing down on poles, making everything lock into place. Breathe in slowly, as if you are drawing fresh air up through the space between walls. Hold it for a moment, just enough to feel the warmth. Then let it go, as if the smoke flaps have opened a narrow channel and the breath can leave cleanly, again, in and out. If thoughts drift in, let them be like drops on hide. They land, they darken a spot, then they run down and away. They do not need to stay on your mind. If a memory appears, let it be treated with respect, like an artifact brushed free of dust, then placed gently back where it belongs. If you feel the vastness of the sky, let it be a ceiling that does not press down, only spreads wide, giving you room. If you feel the dark, let it be candlelight darkness, the kind that makes edges soft and safe. And if you feel the story lingering, let it linger as a sound, a distant rain that is already moving away. Before sleep takes you completely, let me slow down one more simple sequence, because the simplest sequences are often the most calming. Picture morning arriving without celebration. A thin light first, then a little more. Someone wakes not because an alarm rings, but because their body senses the shift. The sound of rain has thinned enough that the ear can pick out other noises again. A distant bird calling, a horse snorting softly outside. An adult sits up slowly, careful not to disturb anyone. A hand reaches toward the fire pit to feel the heat still living in the stones. Fingers hover. The warmth is there. A stick moves ash aside with a quiet scrape. A small red ember appears, then another. Breath leans toward them, gentle, and the ember brightens. Kindling is added one thin piece at a time, and a flame rises, small, then steadier, and the light returns to the liner in a soft pulse. This is a dawn ritual, practical, and also deeply comforting. It says, we are still here. Outside, the cover is heavy with water. Along the lower edge, the gap beneath the hide lets air slip in, cool and clean, beginning the slow upward drift through the space between walls. The shelter breathes, in through the bottom, out through the top. A person unlaces the door flap, just a little. Cold air touches the face. It smells like wet prairie and damp clay. The light beyond the flap is gray and wide. The sky still layered with cloud, but no longer threatening. Sometimes, after a night like this, the world outside looks newly washed. Grass bows under droplets. Soil holds prints for a short while, then lets them fade. If the camp needs to move later, the routine begins gently. Robes are shaken, mats are rolled. The liner is untucked carefully, and folded so it does not crease into a future tear. When the cover is pulled free, you can hear the wet hide release with a sound like a long sigh. This, too, is part of the design, not only to endure the storm, but to let you leave afterward. Because staying safe is not always about building a fortress. Sometimes it is about being able to lift your home and carry it away from whatever is coming next. That portability is beautiful, and it is also haunted, because history turned it into both strength and sorrow. We do not have to press on that sorrow tonight. We only acknowledge it, the way you acknowledge thunder without stepping outside. Then we return to the calm mechanics again, because the mechanics are steady and they can hold you. Notice how the wet hide, when it finally begins to dry, will loosen again. The cover will become lighter. Even the storm's sealing effect is temporary. Temporary can be frightening, but it can also be comforting. If tightness loosens, then pressure can ease. If darkness thins at the horizon, then fear can thin too. Let this story do the same for you. If your mind has been holding itself taut, let it loosen by degrees. Dust will settle after the storm, and that is another gentle truth. Dust settles on hides, on stones, on the places where stakes once stood. It settles on stories too. Later, someone might brush it aside and find a seam, a pattern, a circle. Memory can look quiet under ash, then flare when it meets a little air. Sometimes that air is a gathering by a river, the slow breath of water, the low murmur of voices, candlelight on faces, and the feeling that the circle is still possible. Imagine the liner tucked under you, sealing drafts at the floor. Imagine still air trapped between walls. Imagine the storm already leaving. Let that image be your shelter. The fire is low now. The stones are warm. The liner is tucked. The earth is drinking quietly. The family, in our imagination, is still asleep, their breathing joining the last soft patter. Their shelter stands, patient and forgiving, inside a storm that has lost its anger. The horizon continues to lighten by a thread, and you can let yourself go with it, downward into rest, upward into calm. Wherever sleep chooses to take you, I will stay here by the fireplace a little longer, listening to the quiet that follows weather and letting that quiet pass to you through the dark. Good night.